Our story begins with a strange secret. Whenever there is physical contact, his language skills improve by 10 points just to win someone over. He had always shown his affection in every possible way, eventually becoming the most famous loyal dog in the entire school. But eventually, Charlie grew tired of it. He confronted him, asking with genuine concern if he could finally just be left alone. It was a sincere plea. Later, he discovered Charlie was spending time with a rather tough girl from the neighboring student body. The effect was the same. From that moment, he left Charlie behind and pursued the tough girl daily, practically begging for her attention. A month later, Charlie finally broke under the pressure, his eyes turning a dull gray as he confessed his feelings. And so, once again, he excitedly began to chase after that particular spark of light. During the final year of middle school, a new transfer student arrived at the academy, which is where things get interesting. The newcomer possessed pure beauty and serious academic talent, taking the top spot in the very first monthly rankings. Unfortunately, his personality was so bright and distant that no one dared to even get close to him. As someone who usually went unnoticed, he naturally had no interaction with the new star at all. However, he recently discovered that every time he had physical contact with this student, something good would happen. It started simply enough. While walking past him one afternoon, he happened to brush against his shoulder. That night, he found $10. Later, while running to take a break, he accidentally tripped and fell. The boy helped him up, and, to his surprise, his lunch ended up being completely free that day. These small gains were nothing special, really. After all, finding a few dollars isn't exactly a life-changing stroke of luck. Everything changed during the second monthly exam period. That day, he was leaving school carrying a bag of supplies. Without warning, someone pushed him from behind, and he began to fall toward the ground. He ended up colliding quite forcefully with a student named Seth, which was a shock to them both. Seth reached out and caught him with a single hand, steadying him before he could hit the pavement. His voice was remarkably soft, flowing as clearly as fresh spring water. He was genuinely surprised, though at first, he didn't think much of this small encounter. But when the monthly results were finally posted, he found himself in utter disbelief. He had gained over 500 points, a score he hadn't surpassed since starting middle school. No matter how hard he had studied before, he could never seem to break through that ceiling. But this time, the barrier was shattered, and he was almost afraid to celebrate too soon. With his heart in his throat, he carefully recalculated his total score once again. He was on the verge of tears, desperate to prove that this stroke of luck was real. Suspecting it was all connected to Seth, he decided he had to try one more time. We see him return to school, where Seth remained as cold and distant as ever. It was difficult to even exchange a single word with him, let alone find an excuse to touch him. He waited the entire day, but unfortunately, not a single opportunity presented itself. As the evening classes finally came to an end, Seth reached for his bag to leave. In a bit of a panic, he scrambled to shove his own notebooks into his bag. He was prepared to chase after him, but by the time he rushed out, Seth was already gone. At this hour, the school hallways were flooded with crowds of people moving together. Students were excitedly rushing home, passing by him like a relentless stream of water. Try as he might, he simply couldn't catch sight of Seth anywhere in the chaos. And to make matters worse, he was beginning to feel a strange sense of dread. His bag slipped to the ground, and in the middle of the rush, he lost his footing and fell. His phone went flying 2 meters away, and his only thought was a desperate hope that no one would step on it. He lay there on the cold floor, feeling like a discarded corpse amidst the rushing crowd. His gaze remained silent and low, and to be honest, not a single person seemed to notice him there. Suddenly, a shadow fell over him as someone came to a halt right in front of his face. A man standing nearby let out a mocking laugh, asking his companion why this little lover boy had fallen so hard. The woman looked down at him for 2 long seconds, her expression unreadable and cold. She calmly turned away, asking what he even wanted from her, before walking off with the man as if nothing had happened. His breath hitched in his throat, but strangely enough, he felt a lingering sweetness in his heart. This was Olivia, the woman he had been secretly in love with for a very long time. A month ago, he had finally gathered the courage to contact her and confess his feelings. She had looked at him, refused his gift, and mockingly asked what his recent exam scores were. She told him she didn't date idiots, a harsh statement that he never expected to hear from her. He had suffered through a great deal of pain since then, and an entire month had passed in a blur. Although he had recovered somewhat, her current behavior still left him feeling more than a little embarrassed. Her new boyfriend was the second best student in their year, a young man named William. Seeing them together, one couldn't help but notice they seemed like a perfectly matched, successful pair. With people swarming around him, he took a deep breath, composed himself, and reached out to retrieve his phone. Before he could grab it, a pale, slender hand appeared in his vision, and he looked up in surprise. That hand was already holding the phone out toward him, and he slowly reached out to take it back. The moment their fingertips brushed against one another, a sudden, deafening sound echoed through his mind. William's voice sounded distant as he called out to the girl, whose name was Olivia. He asked her what was wrong, but our protagonist, Owen, was barely listening to their exchange. Owen remembered the first time he saw Olivia at school. Even back then, he had been completely captivated by her. To him, she felt like a lucky charm, a presence that changed the very air around him. He had convinced himself that whenever they had any kind of contact, something wonderful was bound to happen. Deep down, he felt he had to seize every possible opportunity to be near her. After returning to school, he began to obsessively plan how he might secure another invitation to speak with her. He knew he couldn't rely on chance encounters forever. He needed a better way to bridge the gap between them. We see him approaching Olivia's desk in the classroom, while her usual group of friends was nowhere to be found. He drew closer, taking a quiet breath as he realized this was his moment to finally say something. It was a common enough opening, he supposed, as he nervously took the seat right next to her. He asked her if she was a fan of the book she was holding, trying to sound casual, which, naturally, he wasn't. He claimed to love every single story in that particular series. He told her he'd read them many times, especially the one titled My Lucky Uncle. Despite his enthusiasm, Olivia simply stared at him with an unreadable expression, not saying a single word. Eventually, she spoke with a dismissive air, as if she had far more important things on her mind. Owen quickly apologized, stammering that he only wanted to have a quick chat with her. She looked at him with shimmering eyes and told him she was actually quite busy at the moment. She was reading a tragedy, after all, and apparently, that required her full, undivided attention. But since she held a position of authority over him, he didn't dare risk making her truly angry. Owen said a few more words, forcing a smile full of feigned interest before finally returning to his seat. He sat there for a while, but suddenly, a sinking feeling told him that something was very wrong. It seemed Olivia didn't actually like My Lucky Uncle. He couldn't help but wonder why. He pulled out his phone to search online, and that's when he saw the large, unmistakable text on the screen. The author was Guy de Maupassant. His first attempt at making a move had backfired spectacularly. He didn't dare approach her again, at least not until the exam results were finally posted. He stared at his total score of 510, feeling a heavy weight in his chest. A cold chill ran down his back. Without Olivia's blessing, his grades had begun to slip once more. He knew things couldn't continue this way, so he gripped his fingers tight, trying to find his resolve. He prepared a cup of milk tea with extra foam, intending to go find Olivia and make amends. But the embarrassment was overwhelming, so he told himself he would wait until noon instead. When noon arrived, he hesitated again, deciding that perhaps later in the afternoon would be better. Then, the afternoon came and went. It turns out, making a simple decision can be remarkably difficult. By evening, we find Olivia out on the courts, focused on a game of table tennis. A large crowd had gathered around the court, with many boys cheering for the girls' favorite team. Seeing his chance, Owen bought a bottle of water at the snack shop and pushed his way into the crowd. He ran into a few obnoxious boys, including Leo, who looked at him with a total lack of concern. Leo remarked loudly that Olivia had clearly rejected him, yet Owen still refused to give up the ghost. He waited as if watching a performance, catching a glimpse of her shoulder as she glanced back at him. He could only pretend he hadn't heard a thing, closing his eyes for a moment as he searched for Olivia. A match had just come to an end, and the players were taking a moment to catch their breath on the sidelines. We see Olivia approaching. She noticed Owen and paused for a brief, hesitant moment. She glanced down at his hand and asked, with a hint of suspicion, why he had come back. He fell silent, realizing he had unintentionally bought a bottle of her favorite sauce from the snack shop. In the past, he would always buy that specific sauce while waiting for her after a game. This time, he had simply picked it up without giving it much thought, a habit of the heart, perhaps. It was a situation easily misunderstood, so he gripped the cup and quietly suggested she take a break from practice. He tried to claim he hadn't come looking for her, though deep down, he knew how that sounded. She pursed her lips and turned toward Leo. In that moment, it was as if she didn't even recognize Owen. The two of them began chatting and laughing together, their voices kept at a low, intimate volume. But Owen heard them clearly enough, and it seemed some people were still refusing to acknowledge his presence. Leo asked if he was all right, then mockingly added that he wouldn't waste his time on someone so foolish. Foolish? To be honest, that was a rather bold choice of words coming from him. Owen took a deep breath and looked directly at Olivia, wondering if she had heard that insult. Leo simply turned away, maintaining that same arrogant and superior attitude. Owen told himself that one day, he would show Leo who the truly foolish one was. As Leo adjusted his posture, Owen felt a flicker of surprise that the boy even dared to say such things to him. Leo quickly turned his head back to continue his conversation with the others, dismissing Owen entirely. He didn't even bother to wait for a reply. Owen didn't get angry, choosing instead to head back toward the dorms. His main priority now was to focus on improving his scores and stop wasting time on people like that. For some reason, we see the girls from our class sitting on the ground after the match. Sophie was drinking water. She was the only one who walked off the court with a bright, sunny expression. No one had offered her a spoon or even a fresh bottle of water. It seemed no one was paying her any attention at all. Owen ran a few dozen meters, wandering around for a bit before deciding to approach her. He offered her the water. She looked a bit surprised, but after a brief moment, she gently accepted it. He handed it over firmly, and as she looked at the bottle, she chose not to refuse him again. She thanked him, though he insisted it was no trouble, claiming he had come specifically to see her. He told her to keep it up as a light breeze began to blow across the playground. The wind caught her hair, making the strands dance and swirl in the air around her. Sophie glanced at him for a split second, though her eyes remained calm and seemingly unmoved. He mentioned it was over, and she asked with surprise if it really was. He looked around and saw people already pointing the way. He told her it wasn't her fault, but when he looked back, Sophie had already moved quite a distance away. He hurried to catch up with her, repeating that she shouldn't blame herself for what happened. He reminded her that she had taken on the responsibility, and even if she failed, it wouldn't really matter in the end. She didn't offer a reply, choosing instead to continue walking in a heavy, thoughtful silence. Owen then asked if she had eaten yet, suggesting that perhaps they could grab a meal together. She didn't seem to be listening, simply stating that they could meet tomorrow morning instead. He promised to bring her breakfast, mentioning that the colorful corn rice near his building was actually quite delicious. She seemed to be struggling with a hidden frustration, and suddenly, she came to a complete halt. He called her a friend and asked what she was thinking. He, too, stopped walking just as quickly. Owen simply told her that, in his eyes, she was a truly wonderful person. He asked if she wanted to be his friend, suggesting they should get to know each other better. She introduced herself as Scarlet, her voice carrying a cold, distant edge as she took a soft breath. He already knew her name was Scarlet, but she quickly added that she had no need for friends. She asked if she could leave, leaving him to wonder how anyone could possibly live without friends. He found himself grinning awkwardly, perhaps looking a bit like an overeager puppy in that moment. He asked again if they could be friends. Realizing she couldn't escape the conversation, she sighed and turned away. Her pace quickened, but he ran with all his might to keep up until they reached the design studio. She headed inside to retrieve her bag, disappearing into a room crowded with other students. Since he couldn't follow her in, he was forced to wait outside in a moment of quiet anticipation. Downstairs, a few younger girls had gathered, and they seemed to be watching the scene unfold. They looked at him with mocking smiles, asking if he was actually trying to pursue someone like Sophie. He felt a wave of nervousness at the sudden question, claiming he didn't really know her all that well. He denied it, of course, wondering what would happen if a friend were to worry about such things. One of the girls scoffed, advising him quite bluntly that he should keep his distance from her. She asked if he knew the real reason why Sophie had transferred schools. He admitted he had no idea. The girl remarked that it was better he didn't know, concluding that the girl was nothing but trouble. According to her, anyone who got close to Sophie was destined to be followed by terrible luck. In the past, it seemed that everyone who crossed her path ended up facing some sort of misfortune. She told him that if he didn't believe in bad luck, he was more than welcome to try his own. The girls tossed their gloves aside, laughing and chatting as if they didn't have a care in the world. Owen watched them leave, feeling as though they were intentionally blocking his path as they went. To be honest, their words felt like a heavy stone had been dropped directly onto his chest. When he finally looked back, he realized that Scarlet had already made her way outside. He had no idea when she had slipped away, or if she had overheard the girl's cruel remarks. He stood there frozen, completely unsure of what he should say in a moment like this. We see Scarlet looking back at him, her gloves gone as she brushed a stray hair behind her ear. Her emotions remained hidden as she told him, quite simply, that he shouldn't follow her. With a quiet thanks, she walked toward the school gates, disappearing into the cold, evening wind. She looked so solitary, like a fragile bubble. Suddenly, he knew he couldn't just let her walk away. He didn't know what had happened at her old school, or why she had been forced to transfer. But deep down, he was certain that being near her wouldn't bring him any sort of bad luck. To him, she was a lucky charm. He called out, promising to bring her some warm red bean soup tomorrow. She paused for a moment without looking back, before vanishing into the evening crowd. The next morning, he took the long way to school just to buy a container of steaming hot soup. He hurried into the school building, finding that Scarlet had already arrived ahead of him. He held out the red bean soup, though she looked somewhat uncomfortable with the sudden gesture. He offered it to her just as the morning bells began to chime throughout the school. He barely heard the noise, however, as his entire focus was on Scarlet's reaction. She hesitated for a long moment, seemingly unwilling to take a single sip of the drink. She kept searching for a book on her desk, refusing to even look in Owen's direction. Feeling a bit awkward, he held his pose and whispered that the soup was truly delicious. After a long silence, she finally pulled out a book and looked at him, her gaze softening slightly. She told him quite plainly that she didn't need it, meeting his eyes with a steady stare. It was obvious to everyone watching that she was considering whether or not to reject him outright. His confidence took a hit, especially since he'd spent an hour buying it, yet he couldn't bring himself to pull his hand away. As the morning lessons began, he retreated to his seat and hurriedly pulled out his textbook. When the teacher entered, he set his book down, still clutching the small bag of snacks in his hand. His head began to ache. To be honest, his feelings for Scarlet were becoming increasingly difficult to manage. The girls nearby couldn't stop giggling, teasingly asking if he was actually trying to pursue Scarlet. He looked at them, wanting to explain himself, but he felt there was no point in even trying to speak. One of them joked that she would be worried if a guy like him ever tried to pursue her. He felt a flicker of annoyance, thinking to himself that he'd be just as worried if she ever noticed him. He wondered who would even want to pursue her. Even if she chased him, he wouldn't be interested. He wanted to snap back at them, but he held his tongue, simply focusing on his own thoughts. Looking down at his poetry book, he reflected on how everyone had called him brilliant since he was a child. From primary school all the way through middle school, he had always maintained the top rank. Yet after starting high school, despite understanding the material, he found himself failing to explain his answers correctly. He kept losing his way during exams, and every time he tried, he felt more like a fool. He began to believe that in the eyes of others, no matter how hard he worked, nothing would ever change. Deep down, Owen felt as though luck had always been something just out of his reach. He had tried so hard to pursue Scarlet, yet he knew that to everyone else, he must have looked quite foolish. He couldn't quite put his finger on why, but a wave of sadness began to wash over him. He bit his lip to steady himself, but a few stray tears still managed to fall onto his hands. He was so lost in his own world that he didn't notice a girl standing nearby until the room suddenly went quiet. It wasn't until a clear, bright voice came from above him, asking why he was crying, that he snapped back to reality. When he finally looked up, his vision was blurred by the tears he couldn't quite hold back. There was Scarlet, standing right by his desk and watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and with her face silhouetted against the dim light, her true feelings remained a mystery. He quickly tried to deny it, stammering no, while struggling to wipe away the evidence of his tears. She didn't press him for answers. Instead, she simply took a quiet, steady breath. Her gaze drifted down to his hands, where he was still clutching that small bag of sweet potato cakes. He had waited an hour for these, and as he held them out, he felt a sudden, sharp jolt of surprise. To be honest, he felt that whatever she was thinking in that moment was remarkably sincere. He wasn't sure why, but his heart began to beat with a gentle, rhythmic thumping. With a trembling hand, he finally offered the sweet potato cakes to her. And then, she took them. She actually began to eat the snack he had brought for her. All he knew in that moment was that while the world outside was cold, he felt a strange warmth spreading through him. Later, during the break, we see him sitting quietly in the very last row of the classroom. From a distance, he watched her nibbling on the cakes while she focused on solving her schoolwork. Owen felt a surge of excitement as he watched her from a distance, and before long, he found himself hurrying toward her desk. There she was, and to be honest, she seemed quite taken aback by his sudden approach. Scarlet looked up at him, her eyes filled with a confusion that seemed to ask what he was doing there. He nervously asked if the sweet potato cakes were to her liking, watching her closely for any sign of a reaction. Encouraged, he quickly promised that he would bring her some more the very next day. She clearly didn't want to encourage his attention any further, yet Owen remained stubbornly persistent in his efforts. Even when she politely declined, he immediately pivoted, offering to bring her something else entirely instead. She told him, quite firmly, that he really didn't need to worry himself with such things. He insisted it wasn't a worry at all, reminding her that they were good friends, or so he liked to believe. She told him he shouldn't say such things, while Owen turned back to his snacks, feeling a lump form in his throat. Deep down, he wondered if he was already regretting the fact that she had actually accepted his gift. As others began to stare, she suggested that if he had nothing better to do, he should simply go back to his seat and rest. But he wasn't tired. He had come all this way specifically to see if she had enjoyed the taste of the cakes. It wasn't just about the food, of course. He reached out toward her under the desk, his gaze fixed intently on her. He wondered if she might finally lend him a hand, especially since the weekend quiz was fast approaching. He knew that if he didn't get her approval soon, it would be far too late to change anything. Eventually, the day arrived when the results of the weekend quiz were finally posted for everyone to see. He had scored 520 points, a result that made him feel as though he might go mad with joy. He glanced over at Scarlet again and again, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction with how things were progressing. From that day forward, we see that he made it his mission to bring Scarlet food and water every single day. He took care of her just as he had before, though we see she clearly didn't enjoy the attention and kept him at a distance. Deep down, she secretly began to wonder if she might actually be a girl of high standing or noble descent. To be honest, she didn't hate the situation, especially since Owen's newfound abilities were helping him improve with every single exam. After 2 weeks of quizzes, his score had already climbed by an impressive 530 points. By the third exam of their final year, he had managed to reach a score of 540 points. The rankings were posted upstairs, where the names of the top 100 students in the high school were displayed. Scarlet found herself back on that leaderboard with a score of 708 points. And right there with her, Owen had also made the list with 98 points. Seeing his name on that board for the first time was a moment that moved him more than he cared to admit. He didn't want to leave that spot, but suddenly, he heard a voice that felt entirely out of place. It turned out that Olivia was also on the leaderboard, which, naturally, shouldn't have been a surprise. He was certain that someone like Olivia would always find her way to the top of the rankings. He turned his gaze toward the board and confirmed that she was indeed listed there. She was brilliant, of course, even though she had actually dropped 18 places this time around. He told himself it didn't matter. For someone like Olivia, it was likely just a minor mistake. Her face had gone pale, and she said nothing, but she kept her eyes fixed intently on him. She simply stood there. She continued to watch him closely. The silence between them grew heavy. She watched him as rumors spread that his rapid progress was due to some hidden power, drawing the attention of those in high places. We see that although Owen used to be cold and distant, he has started to change, never refusing to explain a problem to anyone who asks. When it came time to choose seats, he consistently picked the very last row, right where Scarlett usually sat. She asked if he really wanted to sit there, but he simply gave a cold refusal before sitting down and settling in right beside her. He ignored her surprise and kept working calmly, telling her that if she had time to chat, she should be solving more practice problems. She told herself she would surpass him one day, to which he simply replied that he would be waiting for that moment. For a second, she thought she saw a faint, almost exaggerated smile on his face, but she assumed she must have been mistaken. Before the evening session, a friend named Alex from a nearby school came to visit, bringing 2 cups of milk tea and taking Owen's seat. Alex mentioned a woman who had broken his heart before bluntly asking what exactly was going on between Scarlett and Owen. She felt a pang of guilt as she sipped her tea, but Alex insisted the whole school was talking about her dating Owen just to spite her ex. He teased her about using Owen to make Ethan jealous, a comment that hit a bit too close to home for her liking. The mention of Ethan made her uncomfortable, and she nervously crushed her cup, unaware that Owen was standing right behind her at the door. Owen paused for a moment before walking away, and after Alex left, Scarlett returned to her practice as the sky began to darken. By the time Owen returned to the classroom, the sun had set, and he emerged from the shadows looking visibly upset for some reason. She asked him what was wrong, but he didn't look at her, silently searching for something on his desk instead. She didn't want to argue, so she quietly placed a pen on his desk and decided to focus on her work in the heavy silence. Owen seemed troubled and distant, acting as if he didn't even know her, though she had no idea what had happened that afternoon. Later, we see a group of students gathered outside as the sunlight filtered through the room, catching Owen as he sat at his desk. The light illuminated his face and the fine lines of his features, and as she approached, he looked at her with an unstable gaze. He told her it was none of her business, acting strangely busy as he flipped through the pages of his book with an odd intensity. As they continued their exercises, a sudden and unwelcome figure appeared beside her, and she turned to find herself face to face with Ethan. It wasn't immediately obvious, but Ethan wasn't far away at all. He was watching from the doorway, looking both excited and surprised to see her. She felt a knot in her stomach, as if she had just eaten something bitter, realizing that he had been observing her every move from the shadows. He stepped forward with an air of confidence, greeting her as if he intended to pick up right where they had left off. In that moment, she found herself frozen, unable to process his sudden and unwelcome presence. He used to be unbearable, but now he was offering her dinner simply because she was no longer the fool he once knew, a cheap gesture, to be honest. Wanting to end the discussion quickly, she moved closer to Owen, perhaps too close, as she looked at him with a worried expression. Fortunately, Owen didn't push her away, though his face wore a cold, half-amused smile as he took in the awkward scene unfolding before him. His gaze was heavy with implication as he apologized for interrupting, while Owen maintained a detached, almost clinical attitude toward her performance. Owen took a deep, slow breath before speaking, causing her to instinctively recoil 2 steps as she realized she had no interest in his drama. He couldn't stand it anymore and stood up to leave, pausing only to remark that her sweet potato pancakes were actually quite terrible. The insult about her cooking left her standing there in a daze for a long time, her mind blank even as the next lesson began. She eventually returned to her seat right next to him, but it felt as though they were separated by 1,000 miles of silence. He buried himself in his work, acting so incredibly busy that it became clear he was using his studies as a shield against her. It was as if he were following some divine plan to keep her at a distance, maintaining a precise, icy boundary between them. She tried to lighten the mood, but the atmosphere remained heavy and serious, as if a veil had dropped over his true feelings. She felt she had already said too much, and despite her efforts to stay calm, her heart raced in the quiet room while she focused on her exercises. Suddenly, we hear hushed whispers and urgent shouts coming from the study room next door, telling everyone to look quickly. It seemed someone was looking for Owen, and a moment later, she heard him stepping out into the hallway to meet them. She sat still for a moment before looking up in surprise, hearing a name that caught everyone's attention. Joe. Joe was the top student in the district and arguably the most handsome boy in school, a legend she had only ever heard of until now. She had no idea that Joe was already waiting outside, but the sound of the back door opening was light and effortless. Apologizing to the other students, she turned around to see a boy who was remarkably tall and handsome. The boy offered an elegant smile as he stood there, right in front of her. She felt completely off balance in his presence, and admitting defeat, she decided it was time to go get something to eat. He handed her a small box, explaining that it was a gift and wishing her a very happy birthday. She hesitated for a brief moment before reaching out her hand to accept the package from him. As it turned out, today was indeed her birthday, and Owen realized he had never truly been a part of her world. But wait, we soon see that it wasn't actually her birthday at all. Could she even call her a friend? After all, her social circle consisted of the very best students in the district. They were the elite of the school, and deep down, he felt a sharp sense of being an outsider looking in. It was a bit sad, really. Later that evening in the study room, she finally returned to her desk. He took out the gift box and handed it to her, explaining it was from Joe, which caused her to fall silent for a moment. She remained quiet as she reached out to take the gift, her expression remaining cold and unreadable. She offered a simple thank you, to which he replied that it was nothing and wished her a happy birthday. He tried his best to force a smile, though it clearly didn't come naturally in that moment. He apologized, admitting to himself that he had perhaps gone much too far. He realized he had been overstepping and ignoring her feelings, promising himself it wouldn't happen again. She began tidying her things, keeping her eyes fixed on her pen rather than looking at him. She started to say something, but her voice was caught as a sudden gust of wind swept through the room. The back door had swung open, allowing a cold, biting draft to come rushing inside. He noticed the door was broken and hurried to close it as quickly as possible. We see him navigating a path near the mountains, though to be honest, he felt he hadn't made much progress at all. Just a moment ago, there had been a strange broadcast, something that felt entirely out of place. It felt as though he were stepping back into a land of shadows and forgotten ends. He hadn't intended to pay the man any mind, but his path was suddenly blocked. The others were laughing and gathering together, as if fate itself were smiling upon their little group. He looked at the man and felt a wave of pity, realizing he could no longer offer him any support. A boy with blonde hair grinned, narrowing his eyes as he asked who exactly they were talking about. He found it hard to speak, feeling a sharp pang in his heart as he tried to protect what little remained. He began calculating the probabilities, though he wasn't quite sure where he was finding the strength to do so. He questioned him directly, asking if he truly felt proud of what he had done. He paused, looking him in the eye. The silence stretched between them. "Are you really that proud?" he asked again, his voice steady, wondering if the man felt any pride at all. The question hung in the air. Was this something to be proud of? He repeated the words, searching for even a flicker of remorse in the other man's eyes. It was a simple question, yet it seemed to carry the weight of everything that had happened. He wanted to know if, deep down, the man truly felt a sense of accomplishment. "Are you proud of yourself?" he asked one last time, waiting for an answer that might never come. "Are you proud of yourself? Are you really that proud?" he asked one more time, searching for any sign of pride in the other man's eyes. He had been pushed so hard he fell, looking up in shock as Sam, the one they called the lion, apologized before losing his temper and striking him repeatedly, even snatching away his food. After Sam stopped coming to school for a few days, our protagonist found himself deeply unhappy, leading him to challenge the lion every single day. Slowly, rumors spread through the school that he was in love with Sam's secret, making him the most talked-about person on campus, the lion's man, though he didn't mind the labels. He told himself he didn't care what others said as long as his luck held out, even though he had nearly lost access to his own room by the 7th day. With the new year approaching, the air grew biting and breath turned to frost. He had washed his hair that morning but ran out of time to dry it before heading to school. By the time he arrived, his hair was only half dry, and that was when we see Sam had finally returned, quietly reading a book after his long absence. He felt Sam looked even more striking than before, and when Sam looked up and noticed him, a heavy, quiet stillness settled over the entire room. It felt as though Sam could hear the very beating of his heart. Sam smiled, beckoned him over, and touched his hair as if answering a question he hadn't yet asked. Deep down, he felt a sense of lingering dissatisfaction, so he finished his meal and returned to bed, though the atmosphere remained incredibly tense as Sam watched him. Sam suddenly asked why he had changed his hairstyle, and for a moment, his heart skipped a beat, though he realized Sam was likely just noticing he wasn't wearing his glasses. He gave a small, awkward smile and claimed he just wanted a change of style. Sam simply lowered his eyes and breathed softly, accepting the answer. When asked why he'd been gone so long, Sam revealed he'd been hospitalized with severe pneumonia, leaving our protagonist staring at him in genuine surprise. As Sam turned back to his poetry book, a cold realization set in. He had never truly entered Sam's world, possessing neither his contact information nor any place in his private life. He knew nothing of Sam's past, his birthday, or even his illness. He had no right to know, until Sam mentioned he'd heard about the level 4 videos he'd been watching. Sam looked at him sharply and snapped his notebook shut, mentioning a name, Marilyn, which left our protagonist completely stunned. He hadn't expected Sam to hear those rumors, and though he was worried, he admitted it was true. He was looking for her because he needed to do something important. Sam looked back at his book, his gaze flickering with unreadable emotions as he gave a stern warning. In the future, he should stay far away from her. Sam warned him that the school exams were approaching, and he shouldn't let a single dog ruin his future, a comment that left the young man quite startled. He wondered why Sam would say such things, but he didn't dare ask. Instead, he simply focused on his daily routine, knowing exactly what he had to do. As the school day neared its end, our protagonist felt a lingering sense of unease while he waited for Luke once again, only to see him suddenly bolt away. He felt uncomfortable as he followed, and on the way out of the school, a fellow student kindly pointed out that a girl named Jane was calling for him from behind. He couldn't stop to explain and kept running to catch up with Luke, eventually finding him near the entrance of a side street. Luke was on the phone, and the loud voice of a middle-aged man, likely his father, could be heard demanding money and calling him a failure. When asked why he wanted to change schools if everything was fine, Luke remained silent for a moment before admitting he was being bullied. Luke claimed he was the one fighting and quickly hung up the phone. As he turned around and saw our protagonist approaching, fear flashed in his eyes. Our protagonist grabbed him by the shirt, and though Luke struggled to be let go, he stood his ground, insisting that he wasn't going anywhere. Luke, unable to take it anymore, gave him a forceful shove that sent him stumbling backward toward a set of stairs he hadn't noticed. Imagine the scene: a tumble down the stairs into a pile of broken tables and chairs, leaving him bruised and shaken while a terrified Luke watched from above. Luke moved to help, but someone else suddenly stepped in. Sam appeared out of nowhere, standing protectively in front of our protagonist. From his position on the ground, he couldn't see Sam's face, only his heavy breath in the cold air as Sam asked if he was all right. He tried to stand up but failed due to the pain, so Sam reached down and firmly took hold of his hand to steady him. Sam wrapped his other arm around him to keep him from falling, and in that embrace, our protagonist felt his face grow warm despite the cold. Sam turned a sharp, heavy gaze toward Luke, who stammered in fear and backed away as he realized the situation had changed. Luke looked frustrated and angry, but after a few seconds of tense silence, he turned away to join his own group of friends waiting nearby. The other boys surrounded Luke, asking if the matter had been settled or if they still needed to deal with the intruder. Luke decided they didn't need to fight, and as they disappeared from the street, Sam suggested in a quiet voice that they head to the hospital. He insisted it wasn't serious and that he'd be fine by tomorrow, which made Sam look at him with a flicker of genuine emotion before silence fell between them. He finally couldn't avoid the question of why he was chasing after a dog, and as the pain flared up, he realized Sam was watching him with an intensity he hadn't expected. To be honest, he had been quite bothered by it all, and when he mentioned wanting a real connection, Sam simply laughed with a trace of anger, asking if he was truly that insecure. Sam asked him quite bluntly if he really didn't mind getting hit until his face turned red. He tried to explain that this wasn't a daily occurrence and that today was just an isolated incident. Deep down, he still believed Luke wasn't actually a bad person. But Sam had seen enough, and grabbing him by the shoulders, he pressed him against the stairs, his eyes reddening as he asked how things had ever gotten this far. Our protagonist had never seen Sam like this and felt a wave of unease as Sam touched his lip, whispering a question about whether he truly wanted a relationship. As they stood there in the street, the world around them seemed to fade into a blur of muffled sounds and racing heartbeats. Looking into Sam's eyes, he watched as the other young man slowly leaned in toward his mouth, and he could only stare back, his heart pounding in greeting. Suddenly, the heavy silence was shattered by the sound of a security guard's footsteps echoing from further down the street. The guard called out to see who was there, leaving both of them completely startled by the interruption. They quickly broke apart, and Sam avoided his gaze, apologizing and claiming he didn't quite know what had come over him or what had just been said. Our protagonist ended the conversation and hurried away toward home, while Sam stood quietly for a moment before slowly disappearing into the night. Once he was back in the safety of his room, he lay on his bed, finding it utterly impossible to fall asleep. In the quiet of the dark, he couldn't stop remembering the way Sam had looked at him in that singular, heavy moment. They had been so close to a kiss, a moment born perhaps from the darkness and a shared, heavy silence. He told himself that once Sam calmed down, he would naturally regret what had almost happened. He wondered if Sam could ever truly like him, or if Sam was even capable of liking anyone at all. Taking a deep breath to fight back the urge to cry, he pulled the covers tight and tried to force himself into a deep sleep. After tossing and turning for half the night, exhaustion finally won out, and he drifted off at last. On the following day, we see him returning to school, ready to face whatever the new morning might bring. Our protagonist arrived at school quite late. He entered the classroom and sat off to one side, feeling the chill of the cold wind blowing in. No one greeted him. After the heavy events of the previous night, he found himself intentionally avoiding everyone's gaze. He had his reasons, of course. He tried not to overthink things and instead focused all his energy on his studies. With the exams looming nearby, he told himself that nothing else was more important than his grades. At lunchtime, he skipped a proper meal, opting for a piece of bread he had brought along while he continued practicing at his desk. That afternoon, we see him buried in a series of complex mathematics problems. Eventually, he encountered a problem that was particularly difficult to solve. It was a question that required a detailed explanation of barely 100 words. He stared at it for a long time, but to be honest, he didn't have a single clue how to proceed. The back door was open, and people were constantly passing by in the hallway. Finally, two girls appeared, chatting idly as they walked past the classroom. One of them mentioned his name, asking her friend if she was looking for him. He felt a wave of discomfort. As he sat there clutching his notebook and pen, he felt a bit foolish for even listening. He felt slightly ridiculous. Why would anyone be looking for him? It seemed impossible. Since he was always seen with Luke, he wondered why anyone would ever actually like him for himself. The classroom eventually emptied out, leaving him alone. He looked at the test again, trying to shake off the distraction. After a moment, he took a deep breath and tried to sharpen his focus once more. He continued wrestling with the problem, but the solution eluded him, and he began to feel a growing sense of frustration. The more annoyed he became, the more impossible the answer seemed to be. Finally, a new idea struck him, but after a long period of calculation, he realized he was still entirely wrong. As he was scribbling away, a cool, calm voice suddenly broke the silence, pointing out that the problem remained unsolved. Startled, he quickly turned around. We see that Sarah had already approached him. She reached for the phone in his hand, leaning in so close, she was almost surrounding him as she pointed out a missed step. She deleted his incorrect answer, making the logic much clearer. He didn't dare move an inch, his eyes fixed on the screen as she worked. She asked if he understood, and as he regained his composure, he realized this was actually a good sign. The next problem shouldn't be difficult for him, yet she seemed hesitant to leave. Her fingers lingered on the phone as she looked at him. After a moment of hesitation and a deep breath, she apologized for her comments from the night before, leaving him stunned. He stood up quickly, waving his hands to show there was no need for concern. He insisted it was nothing and that he hadn't heard a thing, though he was clearly flustered. Then, she told him she loved him. He froze, suddenly feeling as if he had forgotten how to understand his own language. What could that possibly mean? Was that really what she meant? She explained that she knew he had been worried last night, so she wanted to say it again. She liked him, and they could be together. He was speechless, swept up in a sweet, inexplicable wave of emotion. But then she mentioned that Luke had come to see her earlier, claiming that our protagonist wasn't actually interested in her. Luke had told her that he was only looking for her every day to make her apologize to him. His heart sank. Why would Luke say such things? The situation felt increasingly heavy. He told her not to overthink it, explaining he had his own reasons, and asked if that was the only reason she was saying this. He was confused. Was this an apology, or did she actually hate him? He asked her what she meant by saying she found him annoying and asking him to leave her alone. She looked at him, her eyes slightly clouded and her voice turning even colder. She apologized for those words, but insisted she had never actually hated him. She explained she only said those things because she thought he still liked Olivia. She believed he was only using her to get Olivia's attention or to make her jealous. The realization was painful, like a storm breaking inside him. It was all because of Olivia. Suddenly, the pieces of the puzzle finally began to fall into place. Her coldness had everything to do with Olivia. He remembered that night when Luke had approached him. In his confusion, he thought he had seen her reflection in a mirror. But when he had turned around, no one was there. He had dismissed it as an illusion, but if it had been her, she would have heard everything, and she clearly cared deeply. She was Joe's younger sister, and to be honest, he didn't know her very well. She had sought him out only because she wanted her mother to see him again. He brought up how she had called his sweet potato cakes terrible, realizing that was the only truth in all of this. He began to cry harder, leaving her completely unsure of what to do. He looked at her and asked if she was still serious about what she had said, about the two of them being together. Of course she was, she replied. He began to laugh, though it was a bittersweet sound, realizing just how much her presence had confused and overwhelmed him. He told her she had no idea how much luck she brought him. She finally let go of her guard and hugged him tightly, while we learned that Luke had been watching from the shadows. Luke had spotted her and mistakenly thought Sarah was out with another man. His anger flared as he rushed toward them, convinced he was witnessing a betrayal. He told her that every day Luke felt deceived, claiming our protagonist wasn't worth her time and refusing to let the matter go until an apology was made. He insisted she was being loyal to Luke, or at least, those were the exact words Luke had used to stir up trouble. To be honest, he never expected Luke to express himself in such a dramatic and twisted way. He couldn't understand why there was such resistance between them, wondering if Luke had actually fallen for her himself. In the end, after hearing all of this, Sarah decided to head back to school to find him. It turns out she was only there because of him. We returned to the evening session, where he made his way back to the fourth classroom. When Luke saw him, he instinctively tried to hide, but our protagonist simply placed a cup of honey tea and some snacks on his desk. Luke muttered a quiet thanks. Looking at the tea, he seemed to realize that his friend finally understood what had been going on. He sat slumped at his desk, looking a bit defeated, and accidentally spilled a bit of the tea as he tried to take a sip. He grumbled, telling his friend to stop calling him by that ridiculous nickname, Blondie, once and for all. Our protagonist teased that he'd keep calling him that if he liked, which prompted Luke to jokingly tell him to just get lost. Deep down, he knew that Luke was actually a very good person, despite his rough edges. He told Luke he was a good guy, even if the lady in question was definitely not a good person herself. Luke turned his face away to focus on his tea, clearly not wanting to show any more emotion or look him in the eye. He smiled and finally walked away. After school, Luke and Sarah both headed toward their respective homes. At the bus stop, we see them waiting for their turn, standing on opposite sides as the day finally came to a close. As they stood there, Luke asked Sarah once more if she truly didn't need him to walk her all the way home. She insisted that her mother wasn't actually waiting for her in the countryside, as he might have thought. In fact, she told him that if her mother were to see them together, things would end very badly for both of them. He agreed, leaning against a street sign while a soft, familiar sound began to echo in the quiet evening air. It had just rained, and we see that the streets were still partially flooded with puddles of water. Cars were speeding by everywhere, so he reached out to grab the wheel of her bicycle and lifted it out of the way. Water splashed in every direction, but fortunately, none of it managed to soak her clothes. He told her to be careful, pulling her closer to ensure she was safe from the passing traffic. In that moment, her heart began to race wildly. She stood perfectly still, hardly daring to move a muscle. He looked down at her, his gaze lingering on her lips as the world around them seemed to slow down. Very gently, he began to lean in, bringing his face closer to hers with a quiet intensity. His lips drew nearer and nearer to hers, and for a second, time appeared to stand still. Suddenly, the loud honking of a horn broke the silence as cars continued to rush past them. The bus arrived, and she realized she had to get back to the station quickly. She hurried to board the vehicle. He helped her toward the bus, but just as she was about to step up, he caught her by the arm. Her entire body leaned toward him, and in a sudden, bold move, he gave her a quick kiss. He let her go just as quickly as he had grabbed her. It was all over in a flash. She could hardly even process what had happened before he waved goodbye, telling her he'd see her tomorrow. She whispered a goodbye for tomorrow and stood there, watching the bus grow smaller and smaller in the distance. She watched until he was completely out of sight, leaving her and Luke alone with their secret in the fading light. And so, they continued like that, studying together and working hard toward their goals. After spending more time together, Luke discovered that Sarah was actually a very cheerful person who loved to laugh. Whenever they chatted, she would always look at him with a bright, genuine smile. By the 5th month of exams, he managed to achieve an impressive score of 620 points. Throughout the entire course, he even found his name on the professor's honors list alongside Sarah. She had been helping him so much that he hadn't even noticed her own intense study sessions. He pulled out his phone and began taking several photos of her while she was distracted. To be honest, this was the first time he had ever reached such a high academic ranking. He felt he had to celebrate, even if Sarah seemed a little unconvinced by his excitement. She simply shook her head and smiled at him as he headed back to class after the photos. He couldn't stop talking about his dreams from the night before, and she listened quietly, occasionally adding a word. When they reached the 2nd floor, a boy suddenly ran up to them with his head bowed low. The boy looked incredibly nervous as he tried to hand Sarah a letter, though she had no intention of accepting it. With a quick apology, the boy simply thrust the letter directly into her hands. He turned and ran away immediately, leaving Sarah standing there with the unexpected message. It seems that even in this day and age, some people still prefer the old-fashioned way of writing on paper. Luke quickly reached for the letter to see what it said, but Sarah tried to stop him, telling him not to read it. He grabbed it anyway, jokingly claiming he wanted to read it so he could learn how to write one too. Sarah laughed and reached out to take it back, but he playfully kept it out of her reach. As he climbed the stairs, we see him teasingly dodging her while he began to read the letter aloud. "Oh my goodness," he teased. "If you won't read it, then let me." He jokingly begged her to let him see. The letter began, "Dear Sarah, you probably don't know who I am, but that doesn't really matter." It continued with a strange confession of love, claiming they understood the dark situation she was involved in. But then, Luke's voice trailed off as he reached a chilling line, an accusation that she had pushed Morgan. Those words on the paper hit him like a physical blow, leaving a heavy, sinking feeling in his chest. Sarah looked as if she were drowning in shock before she suddenly lunged forward and snatched the letter back. She immediately tore the paper into tiny pieces and threw them away, acting with a desperation Luke had never seen. He watched her, completely stunned, wondering who this Morgan person could possibly be. Disturbed by the message, Luke rushed back downstairs to find the messenger, but the mysterious boy had already vanished. We see Sarah return to the study room in a daze, where she began working on problems in total, haunting silence. Luke didn't want to pressure her, but that night, he couldn't stop himself from searching for Morgan's name on his computer. After a moment of hesitation, he decided to dig deeper into the school's private archives, hoping for some real answers. Eventually, after scrolling through endless articles, he stumbled upon Morgan's name buried deep in an old comment section. As he read the details, a heavy silence filled the room. He knew he couldn't believe the malice directed at Sarah. He told himself he had to look past the rumors and find the actual truth of what had happened. It turned out that Morgan was the son of a school official who had suddenly jumped from a building last January. He had landed in a pile of trash on the 1st floor, which saved his life, though he had yet to wake up. While he remained in a coma, the comments claimed that only minutes before the fall, something specific had happened. Apparently, Morgan had been preparing to confess his feelings to Sarah right before she walked away from him. And then, in a moment of total despair, he had jumped, leaving everyone behind in the wake of his tragedy. The weight of these revelations hung heavy over them both as the night wore on. Among all the whispers and rumors, the truth seemed more elusive than ever. By the following evening, Luke realized he couldn't let things rest as they were. He decided he had to speak with Sarah directly, so the next morning, he waited for her outside her street without warning, finally spotting her near the entrance. Her expression was dark, and seeing him, there was clearly the last thing she expected. Normally, she would have been happy, but she simply approached and asked why he had come. When he brought up Morgan's name, she seemed caught off guard for a moment, her face tightening into a grim, joyless smile as she asked what he wanted. She looked him in the eye and asked if he, too, believed she was the one who had pushed Morgan from that building. Luke quickly reassured her that wasn't the case, but Sarah simply shook her head, tears welling up as she recalled their last conversation, where Morgan had promised to work hard. He had told her they would meet at the top, and she truly couldn't understand why he had chosen to jump after being so full of hope for their future. As she spoke, the tears began to fall, and her gaze grew cold, as if she were beginning to believe she truly was a curse to everyone around her. Perhaps he had seemed too mature before, leading people to forget that he was capable of breaking, but in reality, he was just like her. He was only 17, after all, and just as prone to feeling deep disappointment and pain. Luke reached out to hold her, telling her he knew she hadn't pushed him. He told her not to blame herself and promised to stay by her side, a gesture that made her pause and look at him with uncertainty. She asked if he truly believed in her, and after a moment of shared emotion, the final day of school arrived just before the New Year's break. With a 3-day holiday ahead of him, Luke decided to spend his time searching for answers at the medical school's health center. By speaking with a final-year student, he tracked down the hospital where Morgan was being kept and went there alone without telling a soul. It seemed many people had visited Morgan when he was first admitted, but the atmosphere had grown quiet by the time Luke arrived to ask for him. The receptionist assumed he was a classmate and directed him to room 16 on the 9th floor, pointing him toward the elevators. He walked through the quiet corridors, passing several rooms filled with families until he finally reached the 9th floor. Now it was time to see for himself, and he leaned in to look through the small observation window of Morgan's room. It was a long, difficult slog through the hospital corridors, but he finally reached the room. The woman there seemed relieved, her eyes clearing as she added that even though it was late and visiting hours were over, he could stay for a moment. Deep down, Luke knew he only needed to see Morgan from a distance to find some peace of mind. The woman gazed through the observation window and asked softly if Morgan had shown any signs of improvement at all. She wondered if Morgan would ever speak again, but she couldn't finish the thought, shaking her head as the tears began to flow once more. Her eyes remained fixed on the bed, haunted by the doctor's warning that Morgan might never wake up and could remain in this state forever. To be honest, she simply didn't want to admit the truth, looking back at Morgan while lost in her own silent thoughts. A little later, she turned back, trying her best to offer the woman some small measure of comfort. She told her she was certain Morgan would hold on for the best and recover soon, a hopeful thought, if perhaps an optimistic one. The woman whispered her thanks, though her voice was tight with the strain of her suppressed emotions. Jade replied gently as the woman set down a vase of flowers and checked her phone with a weary sigh. She told the girl she had to leave for now and reminded her to take good care of herself. Left alone, the woman sat by the hospital bed and lowered her head, weeping quietly in the stillness of the room. Sometime later, while the doctors were busy elsewhere, Luke stood outside the window, watching Morgan intently. She was so young, with her whole life ahead of her, and he couldn't help but wonder if she would ever open her eyes again. Suddenly, in a brief flash of movement, he thought he saw something stir. It looked as though Morgan's finger had twitched. He looked around frantically for someone, wanting to call a doctor, but the hallway was empty and silent. He pressed himself against the observation window, his eyes wide as he searched for any further sign of life. But as he waited, the room returned to its heavy stillness, and Morgan didn't move again. He stood there in complete shock, looking back one last time, his heart racing at what he thought he had witnessed. She waited a moment longer, carefully setting the vase of flowers by the bed before finally leaving the hospital. The next morning, we see that the house was filled with many family members. She cleared her throat, announcing to the room that she simply had to go and study. She grabbed her bag and left. After her study session, her grades had improved, regardless of what anyone said. Her mother wouldn't have to worry about her anymore, and upon returning home, she headed straight for the school kitchen. A few minutes later, Sean arrived to meet her. He asked if she was cold, admitting that he was feeling the chill himself. She mentioned she had written an article and told Sean she had visited Morgan yesterday, believing she would wake up. She asked if he wanted to visit her, having heard that Morgan was still in a vegetative state. She told him he was very self-aware and that Morgan missed him, urging him to go speak to her. Perhaps it would help her. If she could wake up, his conscience would be clear as well, wouldn't it? Her expression softened for a moment, but deep down, she knew the truth. In reality, she desperately wanted to see her, but she simply couldn't bring herself to face the situation. After a minute with Sean, she closed her eyes, lost in the weight of the moment. On the last day of winter break, we find Sean and the girl leaving the hospital together. As the car pulled away, Sean suddenly came to a complete stop. She looked up and realized the woman standing there was the same one from the day before. There were many people gathered behind her as well, creating quite a scene. The woman was smiling brightly, her gaze fixed intently on Sean. Still smiling, she announced to everyone that the lady they were looking for was right here. Sophie's expression shifted instantly, her face growing pale as the tension in the air thickened. She wondered what on earth was happening, as she could clearly feel the weight of the situation. Sophie's fingers were trembling slightly as she urged Kevin that it was time for them to leave. He pulled her along, looking for any possible moment to escape from the crowd surrounding them. But those people weren't about to let them go, blocking their path with cold determination. One man stepped forward to stop them, and as they tried to move, the woman was held back firmly. The woman accused her of merely stalling, claiming she had been hiding from the truth all along. She told her that now that she had finally found her, there was no way she would let her walk away. Things were looking grim, and he immediately stepped in to shield Sophie from the confrontation. He demanded to know what they wanted, threatening to call the police if they didn't back off. The woman simply laughed as she drew closer, clearly unimpressed by his attempt to intervene. Sophie stood quietly behind him, the gravity of the encounter weighing heavily on her heart. He turned to the young girl, Sarah, and told her she should head home first for her own safety. But Sarah refused to leave him behind, insisting that they should all go home together. As the group closed in, we have to wonder how Sophie could possibly face 4 people in a fight. Just as panic began to set in, an electric scooter suddenly zipped past, stopping 10 meters away. The vehicle screeched to a halt, and the rider planted both feet firmly before turning back toward them. As she turned around, her hair caught the wind, and she fixed her gaze directly on him. The girl asked with a playful smile if they were actually planning on starting a fight right there. She told them not to get so worked up, a small, amused huff escaping her as she watched the scene. She reminded them that they had been picking on the 3 of them every single week, warning them not to provoke her further. She relaxed her muscles, adjusted her shoes, and reached for a heavy metal lock from her electric scooter, just in case. Her eyes burned with a sudden intensity as she asked if they truly wanted to test her resolve right then and there. The other girl remained calm, though she quickly realized that underneath the bravado, Sophie was actually quite frightened. She couldn't let her be intimidated, and then, quite suddenly, she broke into a smile. She asked what was going on and who exactly had mentioned anything about starting a fight. Looking directly at Sophie, she claimed that they were actually good friends, which was news to everyone else. She asked if that wasn't the case, wondering aloud why they would ever consider fighting each other. She suggested that since they all wanted to see the fish, she should simply lead the way and take them there. She acted as if nothing was wrong and tried to pat Sophie's arm, but Sophie instinctively pulled away from her touch. The girl didn't seem embarrassed by the rejection at all as she turned to address the rest of our group. She invited them along to see the fish, and honestly, it was impressive how quickly she could change her expression. Since they were there to see the fish and she wasn't stopping them anymore, they decided to head inside together. Deep down, Sophie was still worried that something strange or unexpected might happen once they were indoors. She followed along with us, and once they were outside the room, Lily called out to her mother in the distance. When the mother turned around and saw Sophie, her expression shifted instantly into one of visible tension. She demanded to know what was happening, while Lily simply kept her mouth shut and offered a small, forced smile. The mother was clearly fuming inside, yet she also felt a lingering sense of concern for Sophie's presence there. Despite the internal storm, she did nothing more than nervously massage her own hand as they stood there. She moved closer to her mother, whispering something quietly as the tension continued to simmer between them. Her face was practically burning from the tension Sophie brought into the room, and her expression immediately flushed a deep, angry red. She told her bluntly that she wasn't welcome there, leaving Sophie looking incredibly lonely and isolated. The girl insisted she only wanted to see Maya, asking if they hadn't already suffered enough because of her. She demanded to know what else they wanted, and for a moment, it looked as though she might actually charge at her. But the little girl stepped in to stop her, right there in front of the hospital room where Sophie's eyes had begun to well up. With her eyes turning red, she insisted she had never lied, claiming she only told her that her final year was approaching and she was doing well. She asked if Sophie knew what had been said, as the mother began to cry out of sheer anxiety. Sophie looked at her coldly and told her she didn't want to know, which, to be honest, was a fair reaction. Her expression remained stern as she stated quite clearly that she simply wouldn't believe a word of it. She had promised to study hard and stay by her side, or so she had claimed. She tried to argue that Maya was truly a good person at heart. She couldn't believe she had been the one to push her, and as she spoke, tears began to stream down her face uncontrollably. She felt certain that if Maya knew the truth, she wouldn't be directing her hatred toward the wrong person. Through her tears, she begged the mother to just let her see her one more time. In the end, she was refused, and as we enter the room, we see the doctor finishing his rounds by the bedside. Sophie quietly asked the doctor if there was any chance she would ever wake up again. The doctor's response was grim. It was a difficult thing to put into words. There were no signs of improvement yet, and the atmosphere in the room suddenly felt heavy and suffocating. A heavy silence fell over everyone, except for Lily, whose eyes held a strangely frantic, almost manic glint. But that look vanished almost as quickly as it appeared, replaced by an expression of utter shock. She told herself that everything she had seen before must have been nothing more than a fleeting illusion. Turning to Sophie, she asked with a sharp edge in her voice if she was finally satisfied with the situation. She pointed out that Maya had already been hurt enough, questioning why Sophie would even want to see her now. The poor girl was in a miserable state, and even the little girl couldn't bear to witness any more of this suffering. She reminded her that hospitals require silence, coldly suggesting that Sophie lacked the basic manners to be there. She demanded she leave, certain that Maya wouldn't want someone like her standing so close to her bedside. Maya's mother watched as Sophie stood there, listening intently to every word Lily had to say. She added her own voice to the argument, asking Sophie quite bluntly if she could just leave them in peace. Sophie froze for a moment, her gaze drifting toward Maya, whose eyes remained tightly shut. In a voice barely above a whisper, she pleaded with Maya not to give up and fall into a permanent sleep. She begged her to recover quickly, reminding her of their promise to stand together at the mountain peak one day. She urged her not to break her word, while Maya's mother found it impossible to ignore the weight of those words. With her eyes turning red once more, Sophie stood up and looked directly at the narrator. She motioned for us to follow her, and as Sophie turned to go, we rose to our feet as well. But as we reached the doorway, we looked back and suddenly came to a complete standstill. When asked what was wrong, we realized our eyes were fixed entirely on Maya. Had she just moved? Lily stopped in her tracks, her breath catching for a brief, silent minute. It seemed impossible, and yet, it appeared as though her eyes had actually flickered beneath her lids. Lily's eyes were filled with a mix of panic and confusion as she asked if we had truly seen it too. Sophie turned back to us, her voice trembling as she asked if it could really be true. She was still moving, and we pointed toward Maya as a soft sound escaped her lips. A faint, mournful sound filled the room, breaking the heavy silence that had settled over us. Sophie was the first to react, and she immediately rushed out of the hospital room. She was calling for help, and within moments, several medical staff members arrived on the scene. We gathered closely around Maya's bedside, and a few seconds later, her mother let out a gasp. Maya was truly moving now, and to be honest, we were all incredibly overwhelmed with emotion. We watched as her fingers twitched once more, almost as if she were struggling against an invisible weight. After a long, quiet interval, she slowly began to open her eyes for the first time. Everyone was ecstatic, but as the room quieted down, we noticed that Lily was nowhere to be found. We hurried out of the room and caught sight of her just as she reached the exit. There she was, and only a few seconds later, Lily turned and fled the building entirely. Sophie was stunned by this sudden departure, watching her run off with surprising speed. The little girl, seeing all of this unfold, decided to run after her as well. Lily kept running, navigating her way through the hospital corridors as if escaping a trap. One might wonder why she was running, but Lily simply gave a pained, bitter laugh as she fled. She claimed she just needed the restroom, but her frantic pace suggested something far more urgent. She ran upstairs, but the little girl eventually caught up to Lily and took hold of her arm. We returned to the hospital room, which was located all the way up on the 16th floor. As we followed Lily's gaze, we saw many eyes fixed on her, including Maya's own wide-open eyes. Maya stared intently at Lily without moving, while a strained, difficult sound came from her throat. She gave a sudden shove, and Lily nearly lost her footing and fell. 2 minutes later, the police discovered the warning that had been left behind. Lily was taken into custody, and we find her now at the police station. She was surprisingly honest, admitting she had harbored deep suspicions about this friend since their school days. Maya was simply too good, a bright, beautiful star in everyone's eyes. Her character was even more radiant than her appearance, which was saying quite a lot. She was even the object of Lily's own affection, as Lily was deeply in love with Sam. She didn't feel inferior, believing she had no issues being with Sam herself. As the years passed, her feelings shifted, and she grew to resent Sam more and more. On the surface, she remained Sam's friend, but behind his back, things were different. She began spreading rumors, claiming Maya was a lonely star who brought misfortune to anyone nearby. She claimed Maya was deceptive and had a secret boyfriend hidden away from everyone. Last year, while at Lily's house, Molly approached her because she was Sam's close friend. And so, she came to ask her about the things Sam liked most. She told her that she intended to finally confess her love to Sam. Lily knew, of course, that Sam frequently went out onto the roof for some fresh air. So she shared this information with Molly on the very day of the planned confession. She hid herself away afterward. At first, she hadn't actually intended to kill her. But after Sam left, she saw Molly sitting out on the roof for some unknown reason. She pushed her off, and we all know what happened after that. Molly felt incredibly grateful, though deep down, she was profoundly hurt and completely unaware of the betrayal. At the time, everyone was convinced that Sam was the one truly responsible for the crime. They believed that even if she hadn't pushed her, she had been lured into a situation that forced Sam to leave the academy. While Molly lay in the hospital, Lily lived in constant fear of her waking up and discovering the truth, so she visited every few days just to watch her sleep, hoping to ensure she would never wake up. We returned to the day we visited Molly, intending to use the moment to deceive Sam, but we never expected Molly to be home, especially since the doctors said the possibility of her waking was low, and yet, she suddenly opened her eyes. The truth finally emerged. Since Lily was only 17 when she committed the crime, current laws made a prison sentence impossible. A few days later, Lily was finally apprehended, and when we see Molly again, she is actually smiling. The entrance exams are approaching quickly, and the two of you must work hard to prepare. To be honest, he feared she was being deceived. He had never revealed his true identity, but she had already proven her worth. She simply smiled in response. He wished them the very best and offered his thanks. She was a genuine person, despite his best efforts to remain suspicious of her intentions. He intended to say a few words to her, but she had already left the hospital. The girl from Canberra sped away on her small scooter. He noted that she had been working very hard over the past few days. She felt a bit playful, asking if he intended to give her an award for being such a good person. He suggested they eat dinner together, but she declined, as she had already made a prior commitment. He told her, with total sincerity, to stop getting into fights, especially since the girl from Canberra would soon be taking her university entrance exams. She insisted she would keep fighting. She said she wanted to fight, and then she said she wanted to play soccer. The two of them shared a car ride home. He offered them a lift, placed a hat on her head, and for a moment, the world seemed to vanish as he and Sam watched her leave, holding hands. Walking back slowly. You see, despite what anyone says, you are a good omen. You arrived. Molly woke up, and Sam offered a small, knowing smile. Perhaps it was because of her that he felt such concern, finally deciding to ask Sam if he didn't find the situation a bit strange. He had approached her so suddenly that he had to stop and take a deep breath, convinced that good things happened whenever she was around. He admitted he had sought her out just to use her good luck, but then, things changed. His voice grew quiet as he wondered why she said nothing. She asked if he was trying to trick her, and after a long silence, he simply held her, grateful that things had turned out this way. He felt lucky to be the one who could bring her happiness, realizing they were both good people as the morning sun shone warmly through the spring breeze. A sweet feeling filled Molly's heart as the familiar songs of summer began to echo through the university campus once again. They had waited in silence for years, hidden from the light, just waiting for summer to surprise the world and for her test scores to finally peak. She noticed the lines on her hands seemed to change, suggesting to her that she was finally making real progress in her life. The professors at the university were impressed when the results were released on the 11th day, showing that she and her friends had all passed the entrance exams. It was a grand achievement, marking the beginning of a truly great championship for them all.